Okay, think about this for a second. What if you weren't entirely new? What if the story of you didn't just kick off the day you were born? Now, for centuries, that's been a question for faith, for philosophy. But what happens when science tries to get in on the action? We're going to dive into one of the most profound mysteries there is.
Our story starts, like so many of these do, with a little kid, a 4-year-old from Oklahoma named Ryan Hammonds. He was a pretty typical kid, loved playing. Except he had this thing for directing these pretend movies. But then, his playtime, it took a really dark turn. He started waking up in the middle of the night, screaming, clutching his chest, totally terrified by this dream he kept having, a dream that his heart had exploded in Hollywood.
So his mom, Cindy, she was obviously worried. A doctor told her they were probably just night terrors, that he'd grow out of it. But one night, as she was tucking him in, Ryan said something that just changed everything. He looked at her and said, "Mama, I think I used to be someone else." And this wasn't part of a nightmare. He was calm, he was serious, it was a declaration.
And from that moment on, the floodgates opened. Ryan started sharing all these details. He talked about a past life of Hollywood glamour, a big white house, a swimming pool, fancy cars. But his memories were also a source of real pain. He would just break down and cry, completely tormented, because he couldn't remember the names of his 3 sons from this other life. So his mom, trying to help, started checking out books about old Hollywood from the library. And as they were flipping through one, Ryan just suddenly stopped her. He points to this old black and white photo, a still from a 1932 movie called Night After Night, and his finger lands on this background actor, a guy with a bit of a scowl. And he just says it, "That guy's me. I found me."
Ryan's story is it's startling, right? But here's the thing, it's not unique. His mom reached out for help, and that's where this whole thing goes from being a strange family story into the world of actual methodical scientific inquiry.
For over half a century, a really dedicated team at the University of Virginia has been quietly studying this exact phenomenon. It was pioneered by a guy named Dr. Ian Stevenson, and now it's led by a psychiatrist, Dr. Jim Tucker. And this division, they take a serious academic approach to something that most people think of as purely spiritual.
And what's really incredible is just the sheer scale of this research. We are not talking about 1 or 2 compelling stories here. The team at UVA, they've collected and analyzed over 2,500 cases of kids from all over the world who claim to remember past lives. And when you look at that much data, you start to see these really weird patterns emerge. For example, about 70% of the kids remember dying a violent or unnatural death. A stunning 20%, that's 1 in every 5, are born with birthmarks or even birth defects that seem to line up perfectly with the fatal wounds of the person they remember being. And almost all of them, these vivid memories start to fade away right around age 6 or 7.
But maybe the most jaw-dropping physical evidence is these birthmarks. I mean, in dozens of cases, researchers have been able to match a child's strange mark to the fatal wound of a dead person and then verify it with autopsy reports. We're talking about specific entry and exit wounds from a gunshot or a pattern of marks that matches a really specific accident. It's hard to dismiss.
The evidence seems pretty compelling. So, why isn't this mainstream science? Well, because for every strange birthmark and verified memory, there are some powerful alternative explanations that are rooted in what we already know about the human brain.
And that's really the essential question here, isn't it? Are we looking at actual evidence that consciousness survives death? Or are we just seeing the known and frankly often bizarre tricks that our own minds can play on us?
A huge psychological concept here is something called cryptomnesia, or hidden memory. And this is a real documented thing. It's where you remember a piece of information from your past, maybe from a conversation you overheard or a show you watched, but your brain forgets where it got it from. So the memory pops up later, feeling like a brand new original thought, or in this context, like a personal memory from another life.
The absolute easiest way to think about it is involuntary plagiarism. It's the reason why songwriters sometimes accidentally write a chorus that already exists. A little kid could overhear a tragic family story, completely forget they heard it, and then years later, that story could bubble back up, feeling like it actually happened to them.
And cryptomnesia is just one piece of the skeptical puzzle. You've also got cultural suggestion, where grown-ups might unintentionally guide a child's fantasies. There's plain old coincidence, where vague statements get massaged to fit a real person after the fact. And we know for a fact from tons of studies that human memory is just incredibly unreliable and super easy to implant with false details. So what you have is this fundamental split.
On one side, you've got the reincarnation hypothesis that something non-physical, a consciousness or a soul, carries memories from one life into the next. And on the other side, you have a whole suite of psychological explanations that can account for these stories without needing anything to survive death at all.
This whole debate actually forces us to take a step back and ask an even bigger question, one that goes beyond science and straight into philosophy. What exactly is a self in the first place?
I mean, when we talk about a past life, what is the you that supposedly lived before? Is your identity locked into your physical brain and your body? Or is it something else? A pattern of thoughts and memories? A consciousness that could, at least in theory, exist on its own?
Let's try a quick thought experiment. Imagine scientists could perfectly copy your consciousness, every single memory, thought, and feeling, and then upload it into a super advanced robot. Then, they keep your original biological body alive, but in a permanent coma. Where are you? Are you the robot walking around with all your thoughts, or are you the body lying in the bed? Your answer to that question reveals what you really believe yourself is.
And all of this brings us right back to where we started, standing on the edge of a great mystery, with really compelling arguments on both sides of the fence.
So, we're left with this impasse. The researchers at the University of Virginia have data, verifiable details, corresponding birthmarks, consistent patterns that really defy a simple explanation. And yet, the skeptics have powerful, well-established scientific principles, the flaws of memory, the power of suggestion, the laws of biology, that give us plenty of reason to be doubtful.
Ultimately, it's cases like Ryan Hammond's that force us to confront the absolute limits of what we know. The man he identified, Martin, was an uncredited movie extra who died decades before Ryan was even born. And Martin's own daughter confirmed dozens of the very specific, very strange details Ryan had claimed. So is that a trick of the mind, or is it something more? The science, for now, just doesn't have a final answer, which leaves all of us with the question: are we stories that end when the book is closed, or are we stories that are told and retold again and again?